During the early 1900s, the world was filled with hunger, poverty, and war. Children wandered the streets barefoot. Families went to bed hungry. The sick and the dying were often left alone, forgotten by society. Diseases spread quickly in crowded neighborhoods. Many had no money for doctors or medicine. Sometimes even the weather turned cruel. When the rains were too little, the soil cracked and dried. Seeds never grew, and farmers watched their fields turn to dust. When the rains came too late, it was already impossible to save the crops. But sometimes the rains came too heavy. Floods swept through the fields, drowning the young plants. The water washed away grain, animals, and even homes. And when storms struck with violent winds, roofs were torn apart. Boats sank in rivers, and entire villages were left in ruins. Families who had little lost everything overnight. With no shelter left, people climbed to higher ground, carrying only what they could in their hands. Some gathered in churches, mosques, and temples, praying for relief. Others walked to nearby towns in search of food or work. But hunger and disease followed them wherever they went. Farming families had no choice. They depended completely on the land. If the harvest failed, there was no food in the markets. Prices rose beyond reach, and people went hungry. Mothers searched desperately for scraps to feed their children. Fathers prayed for mercy as they looked over ruined fields. Children cried themselves to sleep with empty stomachs. The word famine was not far away. It was a painful reality that haunted entire villages and cities. Poverty was one of the greatest sufferings of this time. Families lived with empty plates and broken homes. Some were ignored because of skin diseases like leprosy. Others died quietly in poverty, with no medicine or food to save them. Still others were pushed aside by the caste system, excluded in their own society. At the same time, most of the world still lived under colonial rule, where powerful empires controlled nations and ordinary people had little voice or freedom. In this world of suffering, in the year 1910, a little girl was born in the city of Skopje. Her name was Agnes Gongsha Bojakshu. She did not come with wealth or power, but inside her was a light that would one day shine on the poorest of the poor. From a young age, Agnes saw the pain around her. She saw beggars waiting outside churches, mothers weeping because they could not feed their children, and the unwanted left to struggle alone. Her mother's words shaped her heart. "My child, never eat a single mouthful unless you are sharing it with others." While other children dreamed of comfort, Agnes dreamed of service. Her journey would not remain in Skopje. Life would take her far away, to the crowded streets of Calcutta, India, where her kindness would become her greatest gift. The world would one day know her as Mother Teresa, the woman who carried love into the darkest corners of human suffering. Agnes Gongsha Bojakshu, the girl who would one day be known as Mother Teresa, was born on August 26, 1910, in the city of Skopje, in what is today North Macedonia. Her family was Albanian and deeply Catholic. Her father, Nicole, was a businessman and community leader. Her mother, Dronophile, was a woman of deep faith and compassion. It was her mother's kindness that left the greatest mark on young Agnes. When Agnes was just 8 years old, her life was struck by a painful blow. Her father died suddenly, leaving the family in poverty. Her mother, now a widow, worked tirelessly to support the children. But even in hardship, she always taught them to care for others before themselves. Agnes went to a primary school run by nuns, where she learned reading, writing, geography, and history. She was a bright and curious child, with a special love for languages and music. She sang in the church choir and often helped in parish activities. By the age of 12, Agnes felt a strong calling in her heart, a desire to dedicate her life to God and to the service of humanity. She prayed often, asking God to show her the right path. As she grew older, she entered a Catholic high school. There she joined a youth group called the Sodality of the Blessed Virgin Mary. This group prayed together, collected food and clothing for the poor, and visited the sick and lonely. These small acts of kindness strengthened her faith and confirmed her vision of becoming a missionary. At 18 years old, Agnes made a brave decision. She would not go to college or follow a normal career. Instead, she joined the Sisters of Loreto, a group of Catholic nuns who ran schools around the world. The Loreto sisters had already come to India in 1841, nearly 90 years before Agnes's time. They began their work in India by founding Loreto House in Calcutta in 1842, the very first Loreto school in the country. From the very beginning, their mission focused on educating girls, because in those days, most girls were kept at home, while only boys were sent to school. The sisters ran schools not only in India, but also in Ireland, Africa, and other parts of Asia. But India was one of their largest and most important missions. By 1928, they needed more teachers to continue this work. Agnes was ready and willing to serve. She first went to Dublin, Ireland, to study English, the language used in their schools. After her training, the sisters chose to send her to India, where her true mission would begin. It was a painful farewell. Her mother knew she might never see her daughter again. But she blessed her, saying, "Hold on to God's hand, and even if you walk alone, He will guide you." With faith in her heart, Agnes boarded a ship that carried her across the seas to Calcutta, a city overflowing with people, poverty, and pain. It was there that the world would one day call her Mother Teresa. In 1929, Agnes arrived in India after her long sea voyage. She first reached Calcutta and then traveled by train to Darjeeling, a hill town in the Himalayas. There, at the Loreto convent, she began her religious training. She learned discipline, prayer, and the daily life of a nun. 2 years later, in 1931, Agnes made her first vows as a nun, a serious promise to serve God and live a life of simplicity and obedience. On that day, she chose a new name, Teresa, in honor of Saint Thérèse of Lisieux, also called the Little Flower. Saint Thérèse was a young French nun who never traveled far, yet became known as the patron saint of missionaries. She taught that even the smallest acts of love, when done with great faith, could change the world. This message deeply inspired Agnes. From that moment, Agnes was no longer called Agnes. She became Sister Teresa, beginning a new chapter of her life. The Loreto sisters soon assigned her to Calcutta, one of the largest and busiest cities in India. It was a place of sharp contrasts, elegant buildings and busy markets on one side, but on the other, streets crowded with beggars, orphans, and the sick. The cries of poverty were everywhere, and they left a deep mark on her heart. In Calcutta, Sister Teresa began teaching at St. Mary's High School for Girls, a school run by the Loreto sisters. The school was dedicated to educating girls, at a time when most families still believed education was only for boys. Inside the classroom, she taught subjects like geography, history, and religious studies. She was a talented teacher, disciplined, patient, and respected for her kindness. Her students loved her, not only because she taught well, but because she cared for them deeply. She guided them with honesty, encouraged them to study hard, and inspired them to be compassionate. She often told her students that success meant nothing without kindness. But every day, when Sister Teresa stepped outside the school, she saw another world. Children lay sick on the streets. Mothers begged for food to keep their babies alive. The poor lived in broken huts or simply slept on pavements, with no one to care for them. This painful contrast between her school and the slums outside stayed with her constantly. Sister Teresa quietly began helping the poor. She shared food with the hungry, comforted the sick, and encouraged her students to do the same. She led girls from the school to visit poor families, bringing simple gifts of bread, clothing, or comfort. Though her role was as a teacher, her heart was already with the poor on the streets. In 1937, Sister Teresa took her final vows, a lifelong promise to serve God. From that day, the church and her community began calling her Mother Teresa, a title of respect for a nun who had given her life fully to God. Her responsibilities grew, and she later became the headmistress of St. Mary's School. For many years, Mother Teresa balanced two worlds. By day, she was a teacher, guiding young girls in their studies. But outside the school walls, she saw children starving, families suffering, and people with no one to care for them. This troubled her deeply. She asked herself, "How can I teach about God's love in the classroom when so many outside do not feel that love at all?" For nearly 20 years, Mother Teresa taught at St. Mary's School in Calcutta. She was loved by her students and respected by her community, yet her heart grew restless. Every day she saw two worlds: inside the school, clean classrooms, uniforms, books in order. Outside the gates, hungry children on the streets, sick men lying in gutters, mothers begging with babies in their arms. The suffering of the poor weighed on her more heavily with each passing day. In September 1946, while traveling by train from Calcutta to Darjeeling for a spiritual retreat, something life-changing happened. As the train rattled through the countryside, Mother Teresa sat in silence, praying. In that quiet moment, she felt what she later described as the call within a call. She experienced an overwhelming sense that God was speaking directly to her heart. She felt Christ asking her to leave the comfort of the convent and to live among the poorest of the poor. In her private letters, she later wrote that she heard his voice say, "Come, be my light. Bring me into the dark homes of the poor. I cannot go alone. You must carry me to them." The message was clear, but the path ahead was frightening. She was the headmistress of a respected school. She had a community of sisters who loved her, a secure life, and a clear role. To leave all this meant to step into uncertainty, with no money, no shelter, and no support except faith. Yet the call was so powerful, so undeniable, that she knew she could not ignore it. This moment, her call within a call, became the turning point of her life. It was no longer enough for her to teach children about God's love. In her heart, she knew she was being called to leave the school walls and serve the poorest of the poor. But before she could act, she would have to wait for the church's permission. The call she had received in 1946 stayed with Mother Teresa day and night. It was not just a passing feeling, it was a command she could not ignore. But as a vowed nun, she could not simply leave the convent on her own. She needed permission from her religious superiors and from the Vatican in Rome. For nearly 2 years, she waited and prayed. She wrote letters, explaining the deep voice she had heard in her heart. She asked for the courage to follow it. Finally, in August 1948, her request was granted. The Vatican gave her special permission to live outside the Loreto convent and begin her mission among the poor. The moment was both joyful and painful. She had spent almost 20 years with the Loreto sisters. They were her family, her community, her support. Now she would walk alone into the slums of Calcutta with no certainty except her faith in God. Before stepping out, she prepared herself. She trained with the medical mission sisters in Patna, where she learned the basics of nursing, how to clean wounds, give medicine, and care for the dying. This knowledge would be vital for the work that awaited her. Then, on August 16, 1948, Mother Teresa left the convent walls for the first time in her new life. She took off the black and white habit of the Loreto sisters. Instead, she put on a simple white cotton sari with a blue border, the dress of ordinary Indian women. This sari would become her lifelong symbol, a sign that she belonged to the poor. With just 5 rupees in her pocket, she stepped into the streets of Calcutta. She had no building, no staff, no plan, only faith. Her first home was a small room she rented in the slums. Her first classroom was the street itself, where she gathered poor children and traced letters in the dusty ground with a stick. At night, she walked among the sick and dying, offering comfort with whatever she had. Sometimes it was a piece of bread. Sometimes it was a touch of kindness. And sometimes it was simply sitting beside someone who would otherwise have died alone. It was the beginning of a mission that would one day touch the whole world. But at that moment, it was just one woman, with one sorry and one burning desire, to bring love where there was none. Mother Teresa's quiet work in the slums of Calcutta soon drew others to her side. Former students and young women began to follow her, saying, "We want to help too." They saw how she fed hungry children, comforted the dying, and taught the poorest of the poor under the open sky. Moved by her compassion, they did not just watch, they began to work with her, carrying food, teaching children, and sitting beside the sick. But Mother Teresa knew that, to continue this work, she needed more than volunteers. She needed an official community blessed by the church. She met with the Archbishop of Calcutta and explained her dream: a new religious congregation of sisters who would dedicate themselves to serving the poorest of the poor. On October 7, 1950, her wish became reality. The Vatican gave official approval to her new congregation, the Missionaries of Charity. This new order was unlike any other. The sisters wore a simple white cotton sari with blue borders, the same sari Mother Teresa had chosen when she left Loreto. They vowed not only the traditional promises of poverty, chastity, and obedience, but also a fourth vow: to give wholehearted, free service to the poorest of the poor. Their life was one of simplicity: prayer in the morning, service all day, and gratitude at night. At first, they had no buildings of their own. Their classroom was the street, their hospital was the open air, and their shelter was wherever they found need. But slowly, their work began to take shape. In 1952, Mother Teresa opened Nirmal Hriday, the home of the Pure Heart, near the Kaligat Temple. Here, the dying who had been abandoned on the streets were brought in, cared for, and treated with love in their final days. For the first time, the forgotten were treated as beloved children of God. In 1955, she opened Shishu Bhavan, the children's home, for orphans and abandoned babies. Here, little ones who had no family found shelter, food, and love. Soon, the sisters also began clinics for the sick and those with leprosy, schools for slum children, and soup kitchens for the hungry. They went wherever there was suffering, bringing hope to places that had none. The Mother House in Calcutta became their center. It was a place of prayer at dawn, service through the day, and simple meals at night. The sisters owned almost nothing, just 2 saris, a rosary, and their faith. They got their food, clothes, and medicine through the generosity of others, small donations from shopkeepers, neighbors, and the church. Because they lived so simply, almost everything they received could go directly to the poor. What began with one woman, 5 rupees, and a burning desire had now become a movement, a living testimony that love in action can change the world. By the early 1960s, the Missionaries of Charity had become a familiar sight in the streets of Calcutta. Their white saris with blue borders moved quietly through the slums, feeding the hungry, teaching poor children, caring for the sick, and comforting the dying. What began with one woman had now grown into dozens of sisters, each living with the same simplicity, each carrying the same flame of love. But Mother Teresa knew suffering was not limited to Calcutta. Poverty, hunger, and loneliness existed everywhere. Step by step, she began to expand the mission. In 1963, She founded the Missionary Brothers of Charity for men who wished to serve in the same way. That same year, she also established the Co-workers of Mother Teresa, groups of laypeople across the world who could live her mission of love in their own homes, towns, and workplaces. By the mid-1960s, her work had grown so much that the Vatican gave the Missionaries of Charity official papal approval. This meant the Missionaries of Charity were no longer limited to Calcutta or even India. They were now recognized by the Vatican as a congregation of the whole Church, free to serve in any country of the world. Houses of the Missionaries of Charity began opening across India, in Delhi, Bombay, now Mumbai, Ranchi, and beyond. Each house followed the same simple rule: prayer at dawn, service all day, gratitude at night. In 1965, Pope Paul VI gave Mother Teresa permission to expand outside India. Her first house abroad opened in Venezuela, South America. Soon after, new houses were founded in Rome, Tanzania, and Austria. By the 1970s, the Missionaries of Charity were present on every continent. Wherever they went, their mission was the same: homes for the dying so that no one would die alone. Orphanages and children's homes to give shelter to the abandoned. Clinics and leprosy centers for those rejected by society. Soup kitchens for the hungry who had no place to turn. Their presence became a reminder that love had no borders. In Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Americas, people began to recognize the white sari with blue stripes as a symbol of compassion and hope. Mother Teresa herself remained unchanged. She still slept on a simple wooden bed. She still ate plain food. She still owned only 2 saris and a rosary. As her mission spread across the world, she reminded her sisters, "Not all of us can do great things, but we can do small things with great love." By the late 1970s, the Missionaries of Charity had grown from a handful of women in Calcutta to thousands of sisters and brothers, serving in dozens of countries. The world was beginning to notice the quiet woman in a sari who had no wealth, no power, and no ambition, only love. By the 1970s, Mother Teresa's simple mission of love had spread across the globe. The Missionaries of Charity were now present in Asia, Africa, Europe, and the Americas, running homes for the dying, orphanages, leprosy clinics, and soup kitchens. Wherever they went, the white sari with blue stripes became a symbol of compassion. The world began to notice. In 1971, Pope Paul VI awarded Mother Teresa the Pope John XXIII Peace Prize for her service to humanity. In 1975, the government of India honored her with the Bharat Ratna, the nation's highest civilian award. But the greatest recognition came in 1979. That year, Mother Teresa was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Standing before world leaders in Oslo, she did not speak of politics or power. Instead, she spoke of love. She reminded the world that peace begins not with treaties or armies, but with small acts of kindness, feeding a hungry child, comforting a lonely person, choosing love in one's own home. She even refused the traditional Nobel banquet, asking instead that the funds, about $192,000, be given to the poor of Calcutta. Her message was clear. It is not how much we do, but how much love we put into what we do. By the 1980s, Mother Teresa had become a global symbol of compassion. Presidents, kings, and prime ministers invited her, but she preferred the company of beggars and orphans. Photographers tried to capture her image, but she kept her gaze fixed on the suffering before her. For her, the poor were always more important than the spotlight. She did not want the attention for herself, only for the people the world had forgotten. She was called the Saint of the Gutters, a phrase often used by journalists in Calcutta and later around the world. It did not mean she lived in dirt, but that she chose to spend her life in the poorest streets and slums, lifting people from misery and giving them dignity. Yet fame never changed her. She still owned only two saris. She still slept on a wooden bed. She still ate the same simple meals as her sisters. For her, greatness was never about recognition. It was only about one thing: to see Christ in the face of every suffering person. By the end of the 1980s, the Missionaries of Charity had grown to thousands of members, serving in over 60 countries. The woman who began with 5 rupees and a single sari had become one of the most admired figures in the world, not because of wealth or power, but because she chose to love the unloved. By the 1990s, Mother Teresa was recognized across the world as a living saint. The Missionaries of Charity had grown to more than 4,000 sisters, serving in 120 countries. Their homes welcomed orphans, lepers, the homeless, the dying, and anyone ignored by society. But age and illness began to weigh heavily on her. She suffered from heart problems, pneumonia, malaria, and fatigue. Doctors often urged her to rest, yet she always returned to the streets, insisting, "I would rather burn out than rust out." In 1990, sensing her weakness, she offered to step down as leader of the Missionaries of Charity. But when the sisters took a secret vote, nearly all begged her to remain. She accepted, saying she would continue as long as God willed it. Throughout the 1990s, she endured repeated health crises. In 1991, she had heart surgery in California. In 1993, she caught pneumonia in Rome. In 1996, she fell and broke her collarbone, suffered from malaria, and battled further heart problems. Yet in each recovery, she returned to her mission, visiting homes, holding children, and comforting the dying. By 1996, her health had declined severely, and she finally accepted that new leadership was needed. In March 1997, she stepped down as head of the Missionaries of Charity. Her successor, Sister Nirmala Joshi, was elected to continue the work. On September 5, 1997, Mother Teresa passed away in Calcutta at the age of 87. The news shook the world. In India, she was given a state funeral, an honor rarely offered to religious figures. Her coffin, draped in the Indian flag, was carried through the streets as thousands lined the roads to pay their respects. The poor whom she had served came barefoot, with candles, flowers, or nothing but tears to say their final goodbye. World leaders sent tributes, but the truest legacy was seen in the faces of those she had touched. The orphans who found homes, the sick who found comfort, the poor who had once been invisible, but who had been embraced as children of God. Mother Teresa's mission did not end with her death. The Missionaries of Charity continued her work with the same devotion. Her spirit lived on in every white sari with blue borders, walking through the streets of the world. In 2003, Pope John Paul II beatified her, giving her the title Blessed Teresa of Calcutta, and in 2016, Pope Francis declared her a saint, officially naming her Saint Teresa of Calcutta. Her life had begun in a small home in Skopje, far from India. It ended with the world calling her a saint, but in her heart, she had always been only one thing: a humble servant of God's love. From Agnes in Skopje, to Sister Teresa in a convent classroom, to Mother Teresa in the slums of Calcutta, her life was a journey of love. She had no wealth, no political power, no armies. Yet with 1 sari and 5 rupees, she built a mission that touched the world. Today, her sisters still serve in over 100 countries, feeding the hungry, sheltering the homeless, and caring for the ignored by society. Her words remain her eternal message. Not all of us can do great things, but we can do small things with great love. That is the legacy of Mother Teresa. If you enjoy learning through stories, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.